Class and objects. So we can assume the class as a template or a die from which we can create multiple instances. So for example, we can create a Java class and we can create multiple instances for that class. Now let's consider the previous use case, that is the employee ID card. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a class of employee ID card, and then we will create multiple instances for the employee ID card. That is in real time we are going to create multiple employee ID cards. Okay, let's see. So this is a workspace we created in environment setup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new class now. So right click on source, new class. So I'm going to name the file as employee ID card. So now the class has been created. The syntax is like this: the public class, the class name. Okay, so now I have the class created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another class from which I'm going to create multiple instances for this employee ID card. So I'm going to right click, create new class. So I'm going to have it as a demo class, name as demo class. So demo class. So I'm going to write the main method. Don't worry about this method now, we will look into this later. So now the method, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a syntax. I'm going to create an instance for the employee ID card. So the syntax look like this. So the class name followed by the variable name and then equal to new the class name. So now I have the instance created. So the first one is the type class and then the variable name and then the new. So new is a Java keyword which is required for any object creation. Remember the new we have used for array as well. So we have equal to new and then the class type again and then the open parenthesis close parenthesis. So now I have a employee ID card instance with the name Arun ID card. So I'm going to create another instance, say ABC ID card. So now I have two instances for the employee ID card created. So this is what we call the template and the objects. So now we have a class and multiple objects for the class. See that the employee ID card has two fields, that is the name and the employee ID. So when we say the fields, it is nothing but the properties of the ID card, that is the property of the instance. So now let's look at how to add these properties to the class. So I'm going to go to the class employee ID card. I'm going to add the properties the same way we did it in the data type class. So I have the data type long followed by ID and then the string name. So now if I haven't assigned any values to it, I just have the variables declared. So in Java we call it as a variables, but you can call it as field or properties or anything. Okay, so now I have the variables declared. Now there is one more thing we need to aware of, that is the access modifiers. So the access modifiers let let us expose the variables. That is, there are four types of access modifiers. One is public, private, protected and default. So public means anyone can access that variable, that is that data, and the private means only that instance can access it. In general in Java it is advisable to use the private. One real use case is assume that you have a wallet, okay, and no one can directly access that wallet, rather everyone should get it from you. So the private ensure that nobody have access to that wallet. So in the same way I have all the both the variables as private. Now in order to access that we need to have provider methods. So what is methods? Methods is the behavior of a class, behavior of an instance. So the fields or the properties are the properties of the characters of the objects, whereas the methods are the behavior of that class. So for example a human has eye, hand, all these things. So these are the properties and the behavior is the human can walk, eat, etc. So all these walk, eat are the properties or the methods or the functions. In the same way the employee ID card, I'm going to have some methods which will get you this ID. and sets the id. So the method syntax will look like this: public, that means it is available for public, anyone can call this method even outside the class. And then what is a return type? So here I'm going to return a long, so the data type long, and then the method name, that is I'm going to have it as a get id, and then open parenthesis, close parenthesis, and then the curly brace, and then the return keyword. So the return keywords, whenever you return something, you need to use the return keyword, return, and then I'm going to have this dot id. So here this stands for the instance id. So what are the variables we have at the top are the instance variable. To access that, we need to have this dot id. Even if you don't put this, that is fine, but it is always recommended to have this. The same way I'm going to have another method which will set the id. So public, the same way it's a public, and void means it does not return anything. Void set id, that is a method name, and open parenthesis, close parenthesis, and there I'm going to take a input. Whatever input you are going to take, we have to declare it in the open parenthesis, close parenthesis. So I take an input as a long id, and then I'll put it as this dot id equal to id. So here you can see that the input is id, and we have another global variable id. So different, to differentiate this id, even whenever you declare this dot id, that means it is the instance id, global id. If you don't put this, that means it becomes local variable, that is the id which is declared within the method. So if you remove the id, you can see that the method, this value is of no use. There is a warning which says that you are trying to assign the same value to the same variable, that is the local id. Now what I'm doing is I'm assigning it to the local value to the global variable, that is the instance variable, this dot id. So now we have a class which has two properties, and two, and this method is nothing but the getters and setters, we call it in java, because we just get the value and set the value. And the same thing we can do it for name, and the eclipse provide a way, that is right click on source, generate getter and setters, and it will display all the variables for which the getters or setters are not generated. Click on it and click the generate button. So I have chosen name, and then I have click on generate button. So now we have the setters and getters for the name as well. So now we have two variables, and we have two setters and getters. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set these values for this employee ID card. So set ID, set name, I'm going to give it as Arun, and I'm going to set ID as well. The same way I'm going to set the for ABC ID card, the name as ABC, and the ID as 102L. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to print the values just to show you what are the values it is stored in this object. So sys out, don't worry about the syntax of sys out, it just prints in console. You just type sys out and control space, and then what I'm going to do is from the object I am going to use the getter method which we have declared sometime before. So I'm going to object dot get name, this is the method which we declared in the class. So I'm going to copy the same thing again, and I'm going to replace with the other instance. So I'm going to replace with the ABC card. Now I'm going to run the okay, so get name. So you can how to get name is just put an instance name dot, and then just type control space, it will list all the names, and then choose the right name, right method. So now run as Java application, it will run the application, and you can see that two name, the first name is Arun and second is ABC. So now we need to understand that we are setting the values, we are setting the name. When we set the ABC name, it will not override the Arun ID card name. Though the class is same, these variables are specific to the instance, not to the class. So whatever value we set in the ABC ID card will be there only in the ABC ID card. It will not change the Arun ID card name or Arun ID card ID. That is the thing we need to keep a note of it. So these are, that is why it is called, these are instance variables. So now the next thing is the constructor. So constructor tells, using constructor we can tell the JVM or Java that this is how the object should be created. So what we are going to do is we are going to, by default, the Java will provide a default constructor. So that is why whenever we create an object new, when you put empty bracket, it uses the default constructor. So what if you want to do anything within the default constructor, what you have to do is just like method name, access modifier, that is public, just put it as public, and then the constructor, that is the class name itself, and there is no return type for this constructor. That is the only difference. So the methods has return types, whereas this constructor will not have return type because it is only for the instance. It will be invoked only during the instance creation. So you just put open parenthesis, close parenthesis, and the braces as like methods. And here, if you want to do anything at the time of object creation, you do here. So at the time of object creation, whatever you have written will be executed. If you want to do some assist out, you do it. But what I am going to, in addition to that, we can have our own constructors. So the moment we come up with our own constructor, the default constructor will be gone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the ID and the name in the during the construction itself. So at the time of constructing itself, the user has to tell that this is the ID and this is the name of the employee. So I got two variables, two things, arguments, ID and a name, and I map it to the instance variable at the time of instance creation, object creation. So the moment we declare this one, you can see that the demo class has some compile error. So that means because the default constructor is gone, and but you are trying to access the default constructor, create the object using default constructor. So now that is not possible. So I'm going to supply the employee ID and a name here. So these two methods does not make any sense now because we already have given the employee ID name. So those setters are not required. This error. So I'm just removing the double quotes. We have the two instances with employee with ID set and name set. I'm going to rerun the application. So now we can see the same output. So these setters are no more required. We are setting it through the constructor itself. So now we look at the naming conventions. So in general, the naming convention what we follow is for the class name we have the initial caps and all words caps. For example, the employee ID card we have the E caps and the ID I caps, card C caps. And if you notice the D also is caps in ID because any important words we use full caps, all caps. So employee ID card. Whereas for the name variables and method name it's a camel case. That means the first character will be always lowercase and the subsequent words initial character will be a uppercase. So for example, you have the get ID and you can see that get G is lowercase and ID I is caps. So the same thing with variable name as well, but since the variable name has only one word, we don't see any difference here. So it is lowercase. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare another variable, say org name. So private string org name. So here the org name O will be lowercase and name N will be caps. So now this is the variable. We have the org lowercase and N uppercase. So this is the naming convention we follow, Java standard naming convention. So I recommend you also follow the same thing. So next is on the static. So far whatever we discussed is the instance variable and the instance methods, but there are cases where we need a global class level variables or class level methods. For example, the employee ID all the employee ID card will have the same origin name. So the origin name here should be a class variable rather than instance variable. So how do we achieve that is by adding a keyword static to this. So just add a static after the access modifier. So public static string origin name. By declaring that, it becomes the class variable, not the instance variable. That means all the instance will refer to the common class variable. So I'm going to generate the getter and setter for that. And since it's a static, by default the Eclipse will generate the static method, static variable in the method itself, static keyword. I am removing that as of now. So we have the two methods, get origin name, set origin name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this org name. So for one instance I'm going to set the org name as Arun org, and for the other instance I'm going to set the org name as ABC org. And then, as I mentioned before, the static means it's a class variable, but we are trying to set two different names. Let's see what happens. So and I'm going to print the Arun org name, and then again I'm going to print ABC org name. Let's see what is going to happen. So right click on it and the application again. So now you can see that the both case it is ABC org, not the Arun org is lost, because as I mentioned earlier, it is a class variable. The moment we set it, it will override the class variable. So whoever referring it will get the latest one. So by the time we print Arun org name, it is already replaced by ABC org. So that is the reason we got ABC org in both the cases. So this is in whenever there is a need where we have values which are common to all instances, use static variable. In the same way, there is static method as well. So what we have to do is we just have to declare the method as static. So we just have to put static before after the access modifier public. So now we have the static thing. So like I mentioned, the static methods and variables are class variables. So now we can see that there is a warning. The warning is you are trying to access the static method on objects. That will work, but that is not required. We can directly invoke that method on the class. You don't need an instance for that. That is employee id card dot set origin name will set the origin name, because it is a class level method, static method. So you can remove the second one. So what we can do is we can put it as a first line. So even before the instance creation, we can set the origin name, and then we can create multiple instances. So I'll put it in the top. The moment I create a, I'll set the origin name first, and then I'll create instances, and then I'll get the origin name. So when we get the origin name as well, we don't need the instance. We can get it from the class itself, because it's a class variable. Even if you get it from the instance, that doesn't make any sense, because it's a class variable. So you don't need to have instance. But if even if you put, syntax will work, the code will work, but that is not the right thing. So now we have the static methods fields. There is one more thing called the static block. So the static block purpose is to, if you want anything to be initialized when the class is loaded. Before that, one more thing is that from the static methods we cannot access non-static variables or the instance variable, because the static method is a class methods. The class methods will not have access to the instance properties or instance variables or instance methods. But the other way is true. That is, from an instance method we can always access the class properties or a class method. That is static. From a non-static to static it is possible. From static to non-static it is not possible. The reason being, the static is class at the top level. The top cannot access child's properties. That means the class cannot access object properties, whereas the object can access class properties. So now you can see that when I say put system outcome of origin name, it does not throw any error. So the next thing is the static block. So static block is a block where you can just put static and curly braces, and whatever you want to put, you can put it inside that. So this will get executed only once for a class. No matter how many instances you create, it will be executed only once. So for example, and you can have multiple static block. So here I'm going to have a static block which says, I'm just initializing that, and just now I'm going to run it. So I'm creating two instances. So now we can see that the init is called only once, but you have created multiple instances. So but the init is called only once. So static, whatever you return inside the static block will be executed only once, the first time when the class is loaded. So that is all we have for the static thing. Now let's go to the next thing. I personally don't recommend static. Rather, whatever you want to do it in the constructor. The next is the final and constants. The final. If you want anything which you don't want others to modify it, mark it as a final. That means nobody can change it. Once you declare it, you cannot change it. For example, in the employee ID card, we have org name. The org name is not something we don't expect somebody to change it. So what we'll do is we'll change the org name as final. So by adding final before the static, it becomes final. The moment we add final, it will throw error because we need to declare there itself. So equal to light bean, or you can assign it in the static block, but it's better to declare it there itself. So now we have the global variable, and if you see a error there because you are trying to change, the setter is trying to change the value of final variable, which is not possible, so it throws error. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the setter itself. You cannot set the origin name, or you cannot set the final variables. Since the method is removed, I am removing the top level as well. Now but I have the getter, only the setter is removed, so I'm just going to print again. So now we can see that the light bean is printed. The light bean is something which is be declared as a final, and it comes from there. So with this, the final is also completed. Now the next thing is package. So now we've already seen the sum of the access modifier, public and private. Now the one more thing we need to looking is the default. So default, when we don't declare any access modifier, it becomes default. That means it can be accessed within the same package. That will be visible only within the same package. And the protected we will look into later, the later section, the later topics. Okay, so before we go into the package, let's play a little bit on the access modifiers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the employee ID card. I'm going to change the access modifier of the name. That is, I'm going to change it as mark it as a public. So that means it is accessible outside this class. So once we make it as a public, you can directly refer the name here. So what I'm going to do is we can directly refer the employee ID card dot name. We don't need that get name. We can directly refer that name. Now I'm going to run the program again. So we can see that name is printed. Like I mentioned earlier, this is not advisable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to private. The moment we change it to private, you will get an error there because these variables are not visible there. You can see that it's not visible. So you have to access it through the get name, and this is the right way of doing it. And this concept is called the encapsulation, where the data is protected, and we will provide the Java will provide the name functions to access it. This is one of the important principle of OOPS, that is encapsulation. Now the next thing is on the package. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new package. So the package is, so I'm going to create the same class employee ID card. The moment I create the employee card, you see an error. The type already exists. That means the class is already there. So what we can do is we can create the same class but in a different package. The earlier one was on the default package. Now we'll create a new package. The package name syntax is like this. So it starts with org. Org means organization. Either it can be organization or commercial. See com. So for now it's org and then the actual organization name. So here in this case I will have a light bean and then dot. If you have any account sub accounts or in, you can put the account names. If you don't have it, you put the project name course. So now you can see that there is a first line package, whatever package we have, and the left in the package explorer you can see that the package name. You have two classes with the same name but with a different package name. So what I'm going to do is I'm to copy all the codes whatever we written the other class here, and then I'm going to delete the default one. The moment I delete, you can see that the error in the demo class because it is not able to know what the class is. So now I'm going to just put control space, which will add an additional line import that package name, the new package name dot class. So but whenever we declare a package, to access that, the accessing class should import that package. So now it is imported, and so it can access the new class. So now I am going to run it, and you can see that the same thing has been printed. So with this, the package has been this is the end of this topic. So what I suggest is you try all the thing which we discussed so far, and in addition to that, I will also give an exercise. You can try that. If you are if you are able to do the exercise completely, then that means you have understood the concept fully, after which you can go to the next course. So this is our exercise. So the exercise is to create an employee class with the properties id, first name, last name, address and salary, and then identify the data types, add the setters and getters, and then add a class variable. When I say class variable, it's nothing but a static variable, so org name, and then add the setters and getters, and then create multiple instances for that employee class, and print all the employee variables. So if you are able to do this, you are all good. So this brings end to this topic. So in this topic, we have looked at the objects and classes, and then we had looked at the encapsulation, that is the way to protect the data and how we can access the data. And in the next section, what we are going to see is the other two OOPS principle, that is the inheritance and polymorphism. Until then, goodbye. See you. Bye.